This was one of, if not the most challenging projects I've ever done. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
This is panic time. I think we got to pull it and rethink things.
The actual build process ended up taking over 2 months, but the story actually starts 10 months ago at my local hardwood dealer when I saw one of the craziest pieces of wood I've ever seen. They were asking $1,000 and the employees didn't even know what species it was. They just called it swamp wood. I just had to have this mystery wood, so I made the impulse buy. But I quickly realized that this log was going to present a design dilemma. I wanted to feature the side profile with the cool mangrove-like root structure, but the fluted flower-like structure of the cross-section is also so darn cool. I think I've come up with a design that's the best of both worlds, but you're gonna have to wait to the end of the video to decide for yourself. Speaking of, we eventually did figure out what the species of this mystery wood is. If you think that you know, leave a comment now and we'll tell you if you're right at the end of the video. Back to the build. The first step for my design is breaking the 10-foot log down into 15-inch stump sections. I was pretty nervous for this since I've only used a chainsaw once and I was told that this wood was super hard on saw blades.
One down and I think 7 more to go.
For YouTube, I should totally just say that was crazy. It almost killed me. Oh my God. It actually was a little easier than expected. Next up, we need to flatten the stumps, and this is going to be a little bit trickier than it typically would be with a live edge slab because of the design of this table. And in order for that to make sense, I guess I have to reveal a little bit more about my design. The idea is to have a cluster of these stumps forming the base for the table. Stumps are going to be embedded in a solid epoxy top, and it will extend through the epoxy so that the tops of the stumps are exposed on the tabletop. For this design, I need to make a flattening jig that allows me to get the top and bottom surfaces flat, parallel, and to get all the flattened stumps at exactly the same height. To do this, I'm gonna build a custom tall flattening jig. So while we're building that jig, let me answer that question of why this design required a custom flattening jig. Usually with river tables and other epoxy woodworking projects, once the epoxy cures, you throw the wood and epoxy top on the CNC or use a router flattening jig to get it flat. With this design, we're combining the table base and the tabletop as a single piece that's going to be 14 inches tall. This is way too tall for the 8-inch clearance on my CNC and much taller than any router flattening jig that I've seen. They're usually designed for tops that are 3 inches or less. And while I definitely could have made something a bit less complex, I wanted a tall flattening jig that was adjustable from 12 to 20 inches because I have a few other projects of varying heights that I also want to use this jig for in the future. A week later and the jig is done. We've got 2 parallel adjustable height walls with linear rails running along them so you can move it front and back along the workpiece. And the gantry has a second set of linear rails here that allow you to move the router sled side to side over the workpiece as you're moving it front and back. The linear rail on each side is attached to an adjustable riser, and I built in positive stops that allow me to move this middle piece up and down between these positive stops. And having the positive stops is important because it means I don't have to fiddle with leveling the things whenever I adjust the height. I just move all of them to the same stop, and then I know everything's perfectly level. So is this overkill? Yes, absolutely. But I think it'll save time over the long run because, like I mentioned, I've got a few really cool designs that I will make use of this for in the future. And I know I skimmed over the whole process of making this, but I do have all the footage. So if you're interested in seeing a detailed breakthrough or maybe plans on how to make this, leave a comment below, and if there's enough interest, I will see what I can do. Now back to the action. The first step here is using hot glue and some makeshift supports screwed to the table to secure all the stumps. And I'm just gonna throw this out there. A hot glue gun is a highly underappreciated tool in the workshop. And as much fun as I sometimes poke at a certain neon green tool brand, their wireless hot glue gun is pretty darn amazing. As for the jig, I was super happy how easy it made the flattening process. The only major improvement I would make is better dust collection. You'll notice that I did include a dust collection port on the sled, but my design for the dust collection bristles was flawed. So without boring you to death on this topic, I'll just say I have some ideas, and next time you see me use this, I think it will be a lot less dusty. Some of you also might wonder why the jig needed to be so dang big. The main reason is that flattening all the stumps at once made it much easier to ensure that all the stumps would be exactly the same height after the flattening process. And missed why this is so important? That means you are skipping large parts of the video, so shame on you. I'm kidding, of course. I love all of you, but you really should rewind and rewatch the previous section if you don't understand that concept. All right, guys, moment of truth. Is she flat? I mean, dang, that is pretty darn good. I am super excited. This thing worked awesome. Super happy how this worked out because I was nervous. I mean, that thing, when you turn it on, it's a 2-inch router bit. It is freaking scary. And the fact this worked, I am very happy. While we're flattening the other side of the stumps, I want to let you guys know that channel sponsor ARIAT Work is having a big sale right now, including $10 off all their Made Tough work pants, including my favorite DuraStretch M7 pants. You guys know how much I love ARIAT Work. There's a link in the description to the sale so you can go check it out and get some for yourself. While flattening the slabs, we made a very cool discovery that Tex is super excited about. We had some tubs of water just kind of sitting in the shop, and when the sawdust from these stumps gets wet, it turns this crazy, crazy bright pink color. Very cool, but also good to know because we're going to be submerging these in epoxy, and we don't want the epoxy to turn pink. So I'm going to take some time and just clean all the extra bark and gunk off of these as best I can, and then we're going to apply a thin coat of Total Boat penetrating epoxy. That's just going to kind of bind and solidify everything in the wood, and hopefully, cross your fingers, that will prevent any little bits and pieces of wood or dust from coming off the stump and getting into the epoxy during the pour. So next up, we got to build the form that we're going to pour the epoxy into. In order to figure out the dimensions, we're going to lay the pieces of the trunk out in the shape we think they're going to go, and then take some measurements. I want the top to extend a little bit past the edges of the trunk on all sides.
With the dimensions of 48 by 26 sorted out, I turned things over to my trusty robot to cut out the ellipsoidal base. One thing to note here is that if you would like to make an ellipsoidal table, there are ellipse cutting jigs from people like Rockler Woodworking that you can use if you don't have a CNC, and they work just fine. And for the sides of the form, I'm just using a landscape border I picked up from a local big box store. I applied a bead of caulk to the sides of the melamine form as I screwed the landscape border to it. I then came back with a second bead of silicone around the inside seam of the form because we want to do everything we can to avoid a leak during the epoxy pour.
Before we get to the epoxy pour everyone's waiting for, I want to take a minute to talk about something on the serious side. It's now been 2 years since my close call with death back in February of 2022. For those of you that haven't been following the channel, I had a pseudoaneurysm rupture in my abdomen, and it was a very close call. I'm fully recovered now, but that kind of experience definitely changes your perspective on a few things. One of the things I've been thinking more about is life insurance. So I recently checked out Ethos, the sponsor of today's video, who makes it super easy to get the life insurance you need. Traditionally, life insurance has been expensive, confusing, and time-consuming to obtain, but not with Ethos. Their application process is 100% online with no medical exams or blood tests required. It personally took me about 5 minutes. I just had to answer a few health questions via their simple online form. No medical exam required. And Ethos isn't just easy, it's also affordable. Now I know it isn't pleasant to think about your own mortality, but it is something we all gotta do. You don't want to leave your loved ones and family in a difficult financial place when you're not around anymore. If you have a spouse, child, or aging parent, then you probably already know that you really do need some life insurance. And even for someone like me who plans to have a family at some point in the future, it makes sense to get insurance now because rates only go up as you get older. According to Investopedia, each year that you wait to get life insurance, you can expect your rates to go up by about 8 to 10%. And that number goes up to 9 to 12% if you're over 50. I know this is gonna blow minds, hard to believe, but I am in my mid-40s, so it really does make sense for me to lock in a lower insurance rate now. So if you don't have life insurance, or perhaps wanna look into a lower cost option for your insurance, you owe it to yourself to check out Ethos. Just head to the link in the video description to get your free personalized quote today. I bought a spray booth that's gonna blow up like a big old bouncy house. We're gonna put that together in the garage. Hopefully it's gonna be a clean environment for doing epoxy pours without worrying about dust. Let's commit Project Bouncy House.
So we got it out, inflated it, and it was looking promising, except for one little problem. Buried in the instruction manual, there's an indication that you can't run the pumps for more than 8 hours, and you have to run the pumps continuously to keep the booth inflated. Since the pour is going to take multiple days to cure, this made it completely unusable for our purposes. So I took it down and ended up ordering one of those outdoor canopies. It's not fully enclosed, but it ended up doing the trick to keep dust out of the pour. Now, between the pop-up pour room and the over-engineered flattening jig, you may be wondering why I'm putting this much effort into this project. I've done YouTube for many years, but I've never really sold anything. I always joke that a project only has to look good from 3 sides to work on YouTube. But with this project, I'm trying to break into high-end furniture sales. I think there's gonna be close to a 5-figure price point on this piece when it's all said and done. But in order for that to happen, everything has to be perfect.
So everything is finally level, and it's time to do something I like to do. I don't know if other people do it, but just for peace of mind, I like to do a water test, because if a form will hold water, it'll hold epoxy.
If you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball.
And I'd rather it leak some water than epoxy that costs $150 a gallon. So we'll just let this sit for 30 minutes or so. Make sure it holds. If there's anything that needs to be patched, we'll patch it up. Also cleans the form, so. Looks like it's holding water, so we're good to go there. Now we're gonna head over to the workshop and get the stumps. So we have a little dilemma because I want the top to be solid. There's a few of these voids like this one where the epoxy is just not gonna flow in when it's, you know, upside down. I think what we're gonna have to do is find a little outlet that's below the surface and drill some holes that the epoxy can flow through. And those holes will be under the epoxy, so I don't think you're gonna see them. Hopefully that'll work. So finally, day of the pour. Enough procrastination. Let's carry these things in and do the pour.
As some of you watching closely might notice, I decided to reduce the number of stumps in the base from 6 that I flattened down to only 4. When I started playing around with the layout of the stumps in the form, having 6 looked like too much. I just wanted a little bit more space between the cluster of stumps and the sides of the table. And one thing you really can't show on film because it just looks like me walking around randomly moving the stumps is how long it took to get these stumps positioned in an aesthetically pleasing arrangement. Because of their organic shape, there really was no way to center them. You get one side where the cluster looked balanced and the other side would look completely off. So it was really just a matter of trial and error, moving things around until I got something that looked aesthetically pleasing from all 4 sides. With the stumps arranged, it was time to mix up the epoxy, and it was at this point that I made a very bad decision. I had a bunch of Total Boat Thickset epoxy that I wanted to use up. Now, Total Boat Thickset is actually their medium depth epoxy. For a pour this size, they don't recommend going more than a 1/2 inch or maybe 3/4 of an inch deep at a time. But we had sub-zero temperatures in Chicago. The temperature in the garage was about 50 degrees, and I'd seen my buddy Blake put epoxy into freezers in order to go well beyond the manufacturer's recommendations as far as depth. So I thought with those really low temperatures, I could get away with 1-inch pours. So as you'll see soon, that was not a very good decision.
Oh, all right, well, this is panic time. I'm not sure why that's happening. These are bubbles that wouldn't be visible if you had like pigment there. You wouldn't see them. They're just like really tiny. But when we're doing the clear epoxy, like you're 100% there. Also, shouldn't even be this tacky yet, I don't think. And it's too tacky for those bubbles to work their way out anymore. Like we can't do any more flames or, yeah, I can tell I'm stumbling my words because, yeah, I'm a little panicked right now. Gotta make some calls to some friends here, see what we can figure out. We're back after talking to some people, and I think there was user error. I was just too aggressive trying to get the bubbles out quickly, which caused it to cure before they had the time to work their way out through the more liquid epoxy. I think because the wood is like honestly the most rare part here, what we could do here is just pull the wood out, rebuild the form, and do the pour again. Oh my God, oh, this is painful. That last one is gonna be the worst. Oh, okay, come on. Okay, woo, there we go. Okay, a little epoxy on the shirt. That's okay. You can see actually some of those crazy pink pigments from the wood actually leached in here. It may be a blessing in some ways that we did this. It is now 5 days later. I think I figured out what went wrong so we can fix the problems. First and foremost, I poured to 1 inch thick, which is the very top end of the range that Total Boat Thick Set is capable of. And for that large of a volume, it was probably pushing it. They recommend that that product only go up to about 1/2 inch or so for the really big pours like this. So after talking to them, what I'm using instead is Total Boat Thick Set Fathom. It can get poured up to 4 inches deep, so we should have plenty of wiggle room. It shouldn't cure too quickly, and there should be plenty of time for the bubbles to escape. And just for belts and suspenders, after we mix up the Fathom, we're gonna put it into a vacuum pot, which should suck all the bubbles out before we pour it in. Yes, there will be a few bubbles introduced when we pour again, but they'll be much less. So our chances of having those little micro bubbles trapped in there should be very low.
And with that, I'll shut up for a minute so we can all sit back and enjoy some satisfying epoxy pour.
All right, guys, I think, cross your fingers, it went well. Obviously, we went a little bit darker with the epoxy. It is still gonna be smoky gray when we pull it out of here. It just looks darker because the form is on the other side. But I don't see that micro bubble problem happening, and with a thick set, we should have more time. I think it's gonna be cool, so cross your fingers. We're gonna find out in probably about 5 or 6 days to let this cure, and then we'll find out. 8 days later now, got Tex with me. Good luck charm. Let this thing cure for 8 days just to make sure that it is fully cured, nice and hard, especially because it's a little colder in here. So now cross your fingers, we gotta take the plastic off and then hope that it comes out clean. So the top, it looks pretty darn good. And there we go, nice and level. Well, that's coming off pretty nice. Oh, that's heavy. Woo. All right, let's see if we can't, see if this will pop off now. Oh! All right, that is really freaking cool. This is about as good as I could have hoped right out of the form. Man, once we polish this, I think you'll be able to see right through. I mean, I think you can see a little bit there. Yeah, maybe we'll see if it comes out. At any rate, very happy.
It was late at night, but I was itching to get started on the sanding and polishing, so I rolled the table out of the pour tent and got to work sanding the bottom of the table to remove the little lips that occur because the epoxy clings to the sides of the form. When cameraman Cam arrived the next morning, we moved the table into the main workshop to trim it down to its final size, which is just a slightly smaller ellipse. Earlier, I'd used my CNC to make a template of that smaller ellipse, which we clamped down to the top. I then used a belt sander to remove the bulk of the excess epoxy. This reduced the amount of epoxy that I had to remove when flush trimming it, and in theory reduced the amount of chip out of epoxy I got with the router. The table was a bit over 2 inches thick enough that I had to actually flip it over and come at it from the bottom to finish flush trimming the sides. And while I had it flipped over with the router out, I went ahead and gave the underside a nice chamfer all the way around. You might notice the router did create a bit of chip out on the sides, but fortunately I was able to come back off camera with a bit of epoxy with a popsicle stick and just fill these in. While I had it flipped over, I also applied wood honey to the sides of the stumps just to give them a little bit more pop. I then got to work polishing the top, and I really wanted this thing to be crystal clear, so polishing is super tedious. It probably took me about 6 to 8 hours, working all the way from 100 grit up to 3000 grit, and then using a buffing compound and a polishing compound. Believe it or not, this is not done. There's a few scratches that snuck through and just didn't become visible till I polished it all the way. It's good enough for YouTube if we're just doing the video, doing this for myself.
we'd be done. We're trying to sell this to a very, very high-end clientele. So you know what that means. All the way back down, start over. I'm sure if any of you guys have ever tried to sand epoxy before, you've probably run into this if you look closely and are discerning. It's difficult. And sometimes you do your best, you do it right, and it just, I don't know, you get a little scratch that sneaks through and doesn't become visible to the end and you start over. So that's what we're gonna do. I will see you guys once this is done.
After polishing, I took the table up to the studio so we could have a dust-free environment for the last finishing step. With sanding to 3000 grit and then polishing, I didn't really need a finish on this tabletop, but I wanted durability. So I decided to go with N3 Nano ceramic coating from my buddy Cam over at Blacktail Studio. This is a ceramic coating sort of like what you see people using on cars, except for wood and resin. It's gonna add a ton of durability, water resistance. It also noticeably improved the clarity of the epoxy.
All right, y'all, we got the finished table behind me here. I am super excited to share the beauty shots with you guys. But first, we gotta reveal the wood species. And this truly was a mystery. If you recall, the guys at the shop called it Brazilian swamp wood. They said they thought it was some kind of ficus tree. I searched for Brazilian ficus. I searched for heavily fluted cookie slabs to just see if I could find something, and I just couldn't find it anywhere. So finally I went back to the lumber store and we had to call the distributor that they got this from originally, and we figured out what it was called, Brasiletta. And after some digging, it is an extremely rare and expensive wood. So when I actually purchased the wood, I put a poll up on my Instagram stories. Nobody knew there. So I'm actually curious if anyone here was able to guess it correctly. And for those of you who keep asking about the building review tour, yes, we have already started working on that edit, but now we gotta take a look at this finished table. What do you guys think? Did I do this beautiful wood justice, showing off its side profile and its beautiful cross section? Let me know in the comments, and if you like this one, feel like I've earned it, I'd greatly appreciate it if you sub and bell. That's it for this time, and I'll see you guys next time.